I'm going to call the April 18th meeting of Rush Lake Watershed to order, 7:03 p.m. Let's get started. First agenda item is the minutes of the January and March meetings. I'd like to see if anyone has any questions or remarks on the minutes from January 3rd first.
I'll make a motion to approve the January 3rd minutes.
Second.
Motion made and seconded to approve the January 3rd minutes. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstain? Motion carries unanimously. The second set of minutes is from our March 30th Lake Management Plan kickoff meeting. Give a moment to allow for questions or comments on those minutes.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Second.
Motion made and seconded to approve the March 30th minutes. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstain? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Next up, Treasurer's Report. Todd?
Since the last board meeting, the balance is the same of $9,856.97 in the checking account. That goes through the first quarter. And the start of the second quarter here, we have the April 16th deposit of $18,750. That is the grant from the state.
Thank you, Todd. Any questions or remarks for Todd? Not, I'd motion to accept the Treasurer's Report.
Second.
Motion made and seconded to accept the Treasurer's Report. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Any abstain? The Treasurer's Report carries unanimously. Thank you, Todd. Next agenda item, board member elections. I'd like to begin with some introductory comments. Over the past several meetings, we've evaluated our board composition. We've agreed to stagger terms, add an at-large seat, and put structure around our nomination and voting process. Tonight we'll be voting on all board seats given that bylaw provisions allow for a maximum length of time per term, and historically we have not revoted for directors at the end of their maximum term length. In addition, one of our board members has resigned, freeing up a new appointment for the Town of Utica, and with the creation of a new at-large seat in January, there's an opportunity to seat a director in the newly created seat. At-large seats are just that, at-large, anyone can fill one. So while we have two people who have directly expressed a desire to be considered for those at-large positions, that does not mean that the positions must be filled, nor does it mean that we are restricted to just the two individuals. For my first comment on must be filled, I'll remind the board of our discussion in January included a thought of creating the seat in the event that County Land and Water wanted to fill it. As of this date, after multiple conversations with County Land and Water regarding the opening, none of its staff have expressed an interest in becoming a Rush Lake Watershed director. Second, the comment that we aren't restricted to two individuals. If you're here and want to be considered for an at-large position, there's nothing that precludes you. So, in advance of this meeting, there are two known new candidates that have emerged. So, to help introduce the board that is currently seated at the table to them, I've shared the candidates' responses to the following two questions in advance of this meeting. Those questions were, one, why do you want to be on the Rush Lake Watershed Restoration, Inc. Board of Directors? And two, how will you help Rush Lake Watershed Restoration accomplish its mission? I would like to now introduce those candidates individually, give each an opportunity to verbally introduce themselves, and then allow an opportunity for this board, who is voting on the new board, to ask questions if they wish. So first up, Mark Davis, who is a Town of Utica appointment.
Mark Davis. I have a dairy farm on 81. I got a lot of my drainage is straight through the Waukau Creek and the 8 Mile Creek. I was on the fire department for 20 years for Town of Utica. I recently resigned and looking to get involved in the Rush Lake Committee.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions for Mark before we proceed?
This would fill the Town of Utica vacancy, correct?
This would fill the Town of Utica vacancy. Yes.
What do you feel you want to see happen with Rush Lake?
I'm on board with doing a study, and I mean, you guys have a lot of concern about cattails and the water quality is always an issue. I know I'm on the Winnebego County Nutrient Management Plan in my dairy farm, and all that stuff interests me on, what's coming into the lake, what's going on in the lake. We, the dairy farmers want clean water in and out too. So,
If I may add on to what Mark just commented, one of the items that's a project the DNR is working on is a nutrient loading project in the Fox River to restore water quality. In their draft report that was issued at the end of last year, very early this year, they have all these sub-watersheds of the Fox River identified. The combined Rush Lake watershed, 8 Mile Creek watershed is a sub-watershed collectively, and the DNR in its preliminary report have identified the final leg of Waukau Creek before it conflues with the Fox River near Ombro as impaired for high nutrients. In my view only, and it's just that, as the DNR looks to implement that plan and make improvements in the Wolf River watershed, those areas of impairment are areas where they're going to go to organizations like ours and say, let's work together to try and make improvements in the watershed. So that's one where the DNR isn't really talking to us now about what their plan is because they're still developing the plan. But in the coming years, there's almost no doubt that we'll be involved somehow. And guys like Mark who are involved in the nutrient management plan with responsible practices like that can be very useful for what we may need to do in the coming years. That's my personal opinion about the last thing that Mark said. Does anybody else have any questions for Mark before we proceed?
Town of Utica already appointed him, right?
They did.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Okay. If not, then I'd move on to our second new board candidate. All right, we'll do so. So the second is named Nancy Gleisner. She's in our audience today. Nancy, would you mind introducing yourself and saying a few words?
I think everybody knows who I am. Needless to say, vast interest in what goes on at the lake. And again, as I had explained, it is our backyard. We are neighbors with Kurht and stuff, so we see a lot of what's taking place and what isn't. And I'd like to be a part of that and the continuation of the growth of the lake.
Thank you, Nancy. Does anybody have any questions for Nancy before we proceed?
Yeah, what do you perceive, how long have you lived on the lake?
9 years. We've been up here since '05 and saw the changes of everything. It hadn't started to draw down. There was no vegetation whatsoever.
So you've seen it as a cesspool it was before it was drawn down?
Yeah.
It's a good starting point.
I wasn't sure if you've seen it before it was drawn down.
Yes.
So what do you think is the worst problem with Green Lake, Rush Lake right now?
The cattails are a huge part of it. The growth that's taking place. The lack of waterfall staying like it used to be. There's a lot of different things going on with the lake. How to address all of it. As I've said before, there's many different issues, so we've got to try to find if there's even a solution to fix all of it, same answers or not. It's just it's a work in progress, and you know what the correct solutions are for all those that are interested in using them at the staff discussion first.
Any other questions? No.
Quick question, is the other position, is the one that's at large, is what we're determining? The at-large position?
We have 2 at-large positions that we'll be determining tonight.
Okay.
One of them is presently occupied by Todd, and the other one is vacant because we created it in January. If no other questions for Nancy, I'd like to provide an opportunity, if there's any other individuals interested in being considered for an at-large position at this time, I'll allow you to make it known. You can't vote for somebody you don't know wants to be voted for. Okay. Now I'd provide an opportunity for existing board members sitting at this table. If they'd like to speak regarding their reappointment, if you wish, you could stick to the 2 questions I outlined for the new candidates before, or say whatever you like if you wish to do so. Take that as a no. Now move on to addressing voting. So for today for voting and likely future director votes, Seth and I are advocating the use of a ballot. The reasons we're advocating the use of a ballot are as follows. First, it's commonly done, whether snowmobile clubs or larger national organizations. It's just maybe a little strange in our case because our bylaws are written which ask the directors to vote for the directors. Second, today's and future votes have a higher volume of directors compared to the past. Today, there's 13 on the ballot. Future will be a minimum of 4. Third reason, terms are now staggered. Fourth reason, directors now include at-large candidates it did not used to. 5, ballots provide a clear audit trail of how the appointment came to be, as well as the tally. 6, casting and tallying ballots creates the point where terms of and the directors shift from an old board to a new board and help solve the question of expired director terms that this board currently is operating under. And 7, in the small world, the ballot allows for confidence, knowing you can vote your confidence without fear of reprisal or negatively impacting personal relationships. So with that, I'd make a motion to use a ballot that very closely resembles the ballot that I shared with everyone. It was only updated to include the resubmission from Clerk Sonnleitner from the Town of Utica to include Mark Davis as their nomination because he was appointed a week ago Monday.
I would second that motion.
Seth seconds the motion to use the ballot, which very closely resembles the first with the change mentioned. Any objections? Okay. If not, I'm holding a sample ballot in my hand. The top section of the ballot includes each of the town appointments, as well as who provided the appointment and when. It provides the term which the town appointed the individual for, and it provides an opportunity to vote for, against, or abstain. In the bottom of the ballot, there are the at-large seats. There are 2 at-large seats, which is why there aren't 4 against or abstain for any of the candidates. It's simply 4, because there are only 2 seats, so you can only vote twice. If you vote for an individual, instead of 2 hold the seat vacant, then you should select which one has their term being the longer term through January 2021. So just check a box. Once voting would be complete, Seth and I would tally the ballots and go from there. Section 3.06 of our bylaws indicate that when a quorum is to transact business, up to and including our bylaws, states a majority of the number of directors shall constitute a quorum. In regard to acting, our bylaws state in 3.02 that directors need approval by a majority vote. And it goes on elsewhere saying a majority of the number of directors present at any meeting in which a quorum in attendance. So today we have a quorum with 11 directors present. As such, a majority of 11 is 6, which is the required number of 4 votes that each director needs to receive in order to be installed as a director after the vote. Against and abstain votes have the same impact when the vote is tallied. You need 4 votes for. So, for voting, Seth and I have a very sophisticated ballot box. which you can see is empty.
Is there a rabbit in there?
Nope.
No rabbit?
Place that diapers used to be. And
The rabbit died.
yeah, the rabbit died. And this morning, Seth and I met and reviewed the ballot. And we have 11 ballots for 11 directors at this table. If you would please, I will give you your ballots. You may vote in the booth. We'll put the ballot into the box, and when the voting is complete, Seth and I will tally such ballots.
I have a question. Does anybody mind if we just do them right at the table?
Yeah. If you want to.
I mean, it'd be a lot easier.
That's perfectly all right with me.
So we want to bring up the...
We could share the booth.
position, the officers.
We'll say that for the officer part of the meeting.
Okay.
Because we need directors before we can have officers.
Okay.
So if you're all comfortable voting at your seat, you're welcome to it. If you'd like to vote at the box, you're welcome to that also.
Thank you.
Put right into the wall.
That's where we are.
Yeah.
I'm voting twice.
6.
You vote twice? Yeah, just.
I'm sorry. How many is that? 8, 9, 10, 11. Alright. Seth, let us tally the ballots. Yeah, that would have been really good.
Looking around a little bit.
Oh, good. You want to mark and I'll just pull them off.
I should hold on a mascot.
How about a house red?
No, Kurht.
Just put one dash for.
Yeah, just one dash because we're just tallying it up across the sign. Yeah, I didn't that's so just put an extra check next to Todd to tally it to just the land account.
Okay.
The food. They're supposed to, you didn't eat all the acorns, but there was some on the ground.
No, that's coming up next. That'll be the second.
Shoreline is jurisdictional. Go 1,000 feet from a lake or a pond and 300 feet from the street. I would use up a lot of it. You could be the same.
right across. Okay, this weather's going back pretty quick all of a sudden. There'll be a couple nice days and they'll be gone. Lots of course, they're all trees yeah, we're having a good time. It was 65 at my house last week. I got one I had a working last night. Because I don't think in the daytime down by us it hit me. Which is okay. Lots of divers in the field. Then they go to the big lake to do stuff. All the wolves. My house sounds like an ocean. Oh yeah. Anytime they were there's a landfill, not a landfill. Whatever they call them. I'm still athletic.
Yeah, keep records.
Last year, really? So you got revenue right after.
That's probably regulated. I mean, you got that right. Yep. He says I don't have.
Do you know any good boomerang recipes?
When he said that he wants to.
30th of March we had.
Why would you want to do that?
That just came in.
I don't understand.
I lose track of days. Busy with it's like make hay time with the horns. At the racetrack, it's that.
You gotta get everything set up. One time when is your first race? 28th. Sure.
And it's really terrible weather. But that's the way it is. You just gotta deal with it. Sometimes you get this time it's 70 and sunny every day.
And then the machine
So have you been on? I was working 30.
After that storm, there was a seminar I went to. The chief forest of the city of Waukau he gave a talk about what's all going on in the by that time,
Okay. If we would please reconvene, the ballots have been tallied. Mr. Secretary, would you please read the tallies?
Okay. First up was Ron Bahn, 11 votes.
He remains a member of Rush Lake Watershed. Bob LaBuda, also 11 votes. Brett Helmbrecht, 11 votes. Gary Page, 11 votes. Art Basler, 11 votes. Seth Muskavitch, 11 votes. Mark Davis, 10 votes with 1 abstain. Chuck Kurht, 11 votes. Kevin Fritz, 8 votes yes, 3 votes abstain. Bruce Mueller, 11 votes. Doug Bohn, 11 votes. For our at-large, Todd Thelen, 11 votes, and 6 votes for the longer term. So that would mean you get the longer term. And Nancy Gleisner with 10 votes. Looks like you're part of the Rush Lake Watershed. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, thank you. Would our new directors of Rush Lake Watershed please join us at the directors table? Nope, we got 13 chairs. I anticipated a affirmative vote. All right. It is not glamorous, but administrative blocking and tackling helps us achieve what we hope to achieve. Next up, officer elections. Our officers from this past board session were myself as president, Ron Bahn as vice president, Seth Muskavitch as secretary, Todd Thelen as treasurer. Haven't spoke reappointments to much length, but I would renominate myself to be president. If there's anyone else who'd like to be president, make your wishes known.
I'd like to just say, make a motion to keep the officers in place that we have now.
Second.
Motion made to keep the officers in place as we have them now, made and seconded. Any discussion?
Yeah, I would like to make some discussion on that. I am really not a fan of being buried in paperwork, and I know that's part of it. Somebody has to do it. But I would really, really be happy to not hold the secretary position any longer. I obviously want to be a part of the board and want to stay here and want to work and do stuff for the committee and for Rush Lake, but I do not want to carry the secretary position any longer if we can find somebody else that will do it.
Would you accept it if we can't find anyone?
If we can't find anybody, I will continue doing it, but
I guess one point I'd like to make, Seth, is I believe that Brett pretty much does the minutes for you.
He does.
To me, that's such a huge part of being secretary. That's the reason I would not want to be secretary. So with that, I hope that if things end up here being, Art, you can attest to that as being secretary at one time. If we do end up with no one else willing, I would just like to kind of make that point that the burden of the minutes are not there, and that perhaps that'll make someone else more interested, but that's the point I wanted to make.
The point I'd like to make is I decide whether I'm doing the minutes or not, and I have plenty on my plate, so I'd prefer not to do minutes.
Maybe we shouldn't have even brought this up.
So, if someone's willing to take over the treasury position, I would do the secretary position.
If you're willing to do that, I'd be willing to take the treasurer position. Our bylaws allow for an individual to hold 2 offices, except for someone holding the office of both president and vice president, which makes sense because you need a backup for the president, and you're not allowed to also be the president and the secretary at the same time, which makes sense given the secretary's role with helping with governance. So given that I'd be doing a lot of the grant accounting and compliance, a lot of the blocking and tackling from the treasury role was already on my plate, so I'd be comfortable with that as proposed course going forward.
Sure. Well, then I withdraw my second.
I withdraw that motion, I don't know how to do that.
We have to vote on what they already.
No, if we withdraw the motions, then it's done that way.
All right, motion's off the table, but it sounds as though there's willingness of myself to hold the president and treasurer role, Todd taking over the secretary role to serve as checks and balances on the treasury function and corporate governance, and Ron continuing as vice president.
I'm willing to do so.
Okay.
Is any of the new people are interested?
Not at this time.
Okay. Well, then I'd make a motion that new officers be myself as president and treasurer, Ron Bahn as vice president, Todd Thelen as secretary.
I second.
Motion made and seconded that I'm Brett Helmbrecht, president and treasurer, Todd Thelen as Ron Bahn as the vice president, and Todd Thelen as the secretary. Any further discussion?
Move to cast a unanimous ballot.
All right. Motion made and seconded. And all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Any abstain? All right. Our new officers are installed as of this moment. Todd, if you'd commence with minute taking, I'll connect with you after the meeting to make sure we get everything buttoned up. Okay. Next up, Lake Management Plan. Acting on steering committee composition as well as proposals for plant surveying. Let's begin with the steering committee composition. We met on March 30th to kick off the lake management planning project, and we talked a bit about the prior steering committee's formulation, which I put up on the board over there. The individuals from the prior steering committee, and the slide on the right is the organizations that they came from. We spoke about a desire to keep the steering committee as small as possible while covering as many interests as possible. And we also spoke about an opportunity to have work groups, or I forget the term that we used at the time, that can support the steering committee. Since the meeting, I have been working to tally a list of people who are interested in doing so. But before we get into that, I want to provide one handout that was provided to me by Melissa Curran. And let me just split these up. So Melissa is on a technical team for Winnebego Waterways Lake Management Planning Project Framework, which is working to fix or develop a plan for the Fox and Wolf Rivers combined. And this flow chart, here's 6, if you pass those down, Tom. Here's 6, if you pass those down, please. And these can, if you please pass these out to the audience. This is the framework that they use for their steering committee. And I'll just allow for a moment to digest their framework. But to quickly summarize, the box on the left, that's Winnebego Waterways Committee. That would more or less be Rush Lake Watershed Restoration, Inc., if we applied this as an example that we could follow. The box to the right of it is the steering committee, and it calls out their various members, some of them voting, some of them not. And then the series of boxes on the right, those are the focus groups, which can feed the steering committee and support the steering committee. So, I'll just allow for 1 minute to review this document, and then we'll commence discussion. Okay. So, since the last meeting, I have been tallying a list of individuals who could be on the steering committee. When we left the last meeting, the categories that we had been speaking about that would be on the steering committee were a stakeholder from each of the 4 towns with an appointment on our board, so one for Nepieskin, Ripon, Utica, and Rushford, having a seat for Ducks Unlimited, having a seat for Stantec, having a seat for UW-Stevens Point, having a seat for Wisconsin Wetlands Association, having a seat for Winnebego County Land and Water, having a seat for DNR Surface Water, and also having a seat for DNR Wildlife, and a 12th seat for U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Of those 12 that we had roughed in, there were individuals that presented themselves. The Nepieskin directors, we've spoken, and I'm happy to be the representative for Nepieskin. Ripon, Utica, and Rushford, I do not have a name for. Ducks Unlimited, Brian Glenzinski said he would like to be the guy. Stantec, Melissa Curran identified herself. UW-Stevens Point, Dr. Kyle Herman identified himself. Wisconsin Wetland Association, Tracy Hames, the director from them, was mentioned to me by Kyle for being the contact. I've yet to touch base with Tracy, but I've teed up a conversation with him for next week. Winnebego County Land and Water, speaking with their County Land and Water Director, Tom Davies. He's identified that Mike Haas and Melanie Leet could help us, and they may serve by committee where one might participate in a meeting and another one might do it at a different time if one was tied up. So that one looks like it could be a twofer. And DNR Surface Water, Ted Johnson, and DNR Wildlife and U.S. Fish and Wildlife, we have placeholders for. So before we get too far into it, does anyone on the board want to nominate themselves for Town of Ripon, Town of Utica, Town of Rushford on the steering committee?
Art said he would do it for Town of Ripon.
Art will do it for Town of Ripon. Thank you, Art.
Yeah, Doug said he'll do it for Rush.
I'll do it for Rushford.
All right. Thank you so much, Doug. Utica?
I will do it for Utica.
Okay. Thank you, Chuck. Okay. As we move down the list, so we have placeholders in there for the Department of Natural Resources, Wildlife side, Ellen's group, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So once candidates might be identified or desire is expressed, we could fill those. Besides the 12 buckets that we have there, we have a number of people who had expressed interest. And those people are 2 of our at-large directors. Todd expressed a willingness to participate in the steering committee. Nancy, at the last meeting, you had checked a box to be willing to be on a subcommittee. Perhaps this is the right one, perhaps some other future opportunity. We haven't spoken since the meeting about that specific item. But also, at the meeting, Kevin Tews expressed interest in being supporting of the steering committee, as well as Chris Mannanen, who has attended past meetings and has spent some time on the lake. So I just want to open it up from there to dialogue, because we were talking less can be more as long as we're hitting the interests, and we could use focus groups to support the areas that the steering committee might not have a specific interest. I guess before debate or discussion, Todd or Nancy, you're on the board. Do you want to express an interest in being on the steering committee specifically? Because we could work something out. Perhaps I'm just looking at you on this because I thought if one of these 2 wanted to be on the steering committee for Nepieskin, I'd be happy to yield to them and take on a secretarial role, as we need the minutes of the meetings anyways. So I could bow out of it but still participate, but be a non-contributing member of the steering committee other than taking minutes to ensure grant compliance.
So I would like to participate if possible. I just don't know how we go about deciding who's that extra person. Are you interested in doing it?
As far as heading it,
No, not heading it.
being a part of it.
Contributing part.
Contributing, yes.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Question, is this then going to be a complete and closed list, or are other people, if they come forward, are we going to be able to add them? And whose discretion would they be added?
To answer your question, Bruce, the top left box of the handout from this says, while the basic structure of the framework will remain consistent throughout the project, technical team and focus group topics may change as new priorities or topics are realized. The framework was constructed in this way to accommodate the often dynamic process of developing a lake management plan for the large water body system.
Okay.
So I'd say I would, I don't know if this is the right time to do it, but I'd make a motion to grant the steering committee authority to select members to fill open seats. So that's like the first one. If we have an open seat and somebody from U.S. Fish and Wildlife or wherever emerges. So I'd make that as a motion to give them that authority so we don't need to meet again to install them on it.
I second that.
Motion made and seconded to grant the steering committee authority to select members to fill open seats that we established tonight. Any further discussion? No? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstained? Carried unanimously. Thank you. But then the second question of adding members as on the fly as we need to, I'd be comfortable granting the steering committee authority to do that, which they could either do through having these focus groups, which they could spawn off as they need to, and then those focus groups would in turn become an advisory member that's, non-voting on the steering committee. So on that one, I'd make a motion to grant the steering committee authority to create and utilize focus groups as they see fit.
I'd second that, sure.
Any further discussion on that?
What's the motion again?
To grant the steering committee authority to create and utilize focus groups as they see fit. No further discussion.
You're almost going to have to do that to get the public involved enough in this, aren't you, to qualify for the grant parameters?
No, because there's an open house and a survey that happens, so implicitly conducting the survey gets the public's input, but the focus group can put more meat on the bone, maybe.
Well, I think when we did this the first time, we had, like you have here, we had certain areas that we needed to fill. And then when we had the open house, people were able to sign up to help on those, which might be a good way to get your teams in place. But you still need that motion that you made, so that we can do that, I guess.
And we had subcommittees.
Yeah.
Right. And each of the directors at that time was kind of in charge of a committee, or one of them was at least, and then
and everybody got together and put their thoughts in and helped with stuff. Some actually did some work, and some just got together to, to put interests together.
Okay. So we're still in discussion on the motion to grant the steering committee authority to create and utilize focus groups as they see fit.
Call the question.
No further discussion. All in favor of granting the steering committee authority to create and utilize focus groups as they see fit? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Any abstain? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Okay, so we're back to who do we want on the steering committee as the placeholders. I identified those 12 groups, which were, or 12 parties, which were 4 individuals from the towns that are directors on the board: Ducks Unlimited, Stantec, Stevens Point, Wisconsin Wetlands Association, Winnebego County Land Water, 2 from the DNR and 1 from U.S. Fish and Wildlife, with 2 placeholders currently existing with the DNR, 1 with the DNR and 1 with U.S. Fish and Wildlife. Do we want more? Do we want to allow an at-large on there? And second question to think about too is these guys create this split between voting members and advisory members. And at the last meeting, Ted Johnson spoke about, I'll be on your steering committee, but I'm not going to vote for things. I'm going to bow out whenever there's a vote. I'll tell you what I think, but it's up to the committee to decide. So by adding another director, or possibly 2, as a voting member, it would weight the voting members of the steering committee more heavily towards directors of Rush Lake Watershed Restoration, because my belief is if we have individuals like Brian Glenzinski from DU, Kyle Herman from Point, Tracy Hames from Wisconsin Wetland Association, their perspectives are valuable, and granting them a vote, I think, makes sense. I could argue not giving Stantec a vote makes sense because Stantec works for us. So their opinion counts, but I don't know that it should switch a vote that would have failed otherwise, which is why I would say maybe not. So that's how I want to pose the question. We're at 12 right now. Do we want to go more? And I guess before we get there, Chris Mannanen or Kevin Tews or anybody else in the audience that might be interested on being on the steering committee, do you want to take a moment to speak about your interest and how you'd like to participate, whether it would be on the steering committee directly or in one of the focus groups that might be developed? Whoever would like to speak, you're welcome to it.
I'm Chris Mannanen. I'm a trapper. I got boots on the ground, and I'm into marshes. Been to a lot of marshes all over the state and other states. And I got some experience. I'm really interested in the restoration because I think that there's a lot to a restoration. And if I can help, I'd be happy to.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm Kevin Tews. I grew up on our farm, home farm, on the northwest corner of Rush Lake, and we recently sold a number of acres to Ducks Unlimited a few years ago, and I've got a lot of history about what's been attempted before in terms of restoration, and I've got a lot of documentation that was collected over the years from the different sources that had access to the same question we're asking now. I've got articles going back to the 1940s about the water levels and the bulrushes and the cattails. So this isn't the first time that you've addressed the question. I'm just curious more than anything. I would be happy to serve on any way that I could. I've got a lot of history gathered from the last 40 or 50 years.
Thank you, Kevin. Anyone else from the audience? Okay. Gary?
I just have a question. The Rush Lake Restoration Committee has people on this board of directors, and we have a lot of other people on it for technical reasons. Basically, is why all the rest of them are. Maybe it'd be just the point of not having the whole committee on the steering committee was to keep it a little bit simpler. Maybe those people just don't get to vote. The DNR people and the Melissa, and the technical people, maybe they're just there for the information for the steering committee. It'd you know what I'm trying to say. To keep this, down instead of keeping adding people, then we might as well all be on the steering committee again. If you add another 2 more, that's pretty much everybody that we need. So maybe we just, I don't think it would bother any of those people. Point doesn't care if they vote. They want to direct us to what they see and what they can help. And I think the rest of these people are going to be doing the same thing. Melissa's he's going to be studying this to give us an input on what we should do. It's still up to us what we're going to do. So maybe they just go there on the steering committee to help run everything, but they don't.
They're more like an advisory committee.
Right. Right. And that's the way it's always been before. Even like Ellen, she'll give us her best, when we did this first time. Her people gave us their best input, but it still boiled down to it was us.
Because that's what this steering committee is broken up into for this, there's Brett's paper here, that the county people are the voting members, and all the other ones with their expertise and stuff are advisory members.
So does it matter how many voting members we have versus how many advisory members we have? So like if we leave it at the 12 that it's set up for now, and we only had the 4 members that were from this committee, voting members, and everybody else advisory, is that something that's okay to do?
That's what I was thinking, but then we still would need 1 more member because you don't want 4.
Break a vote.
Yeah, so if you vote, we can, But then my thought again is, Brett's going to be there anyway, and he's really taking the bull by the horns. I have to give him a whole lot of credit. I think he should be the 5th member of this. If there's only going to be 5 that are actually voting.
He's already one of the 4 though, right?
No, he's not.
I'm currently one of the 4.
Yeah. Oh, I thought you.
My comment before was if we wanted to keep the directors of Rush Lake Watershed to 4, I'd bow out and just be a fly on the wall, taking minutes.
Well, maybe we just need to pick 1 more person then to be on this, and not, it doesn't really matter to me if it's probably should be somebody from the board if they're going to vote. I'm just throwing that out.
I kind of like that idea. Just have the base committee the base steering committee be made up of 5 people from this committee here that are all voting members, and then keep all the rest of so we'd have 13 spots for the steering committee total, and we'd only have 5 voting members. Everybody else is just for advisory members.
And I don't know what anybody else thinks.
I like which way you're putting that out there.
There's no harm in it today. If
this isn't working, we're going to do our best to make it work anyway.
Yeah. There's no harm in starting that way today, and the reason for that is 2019 is largely a data collection year. There's little interpretation and recommendation of the future. So if we start that way, there's really no risk to the project, and it keeps things in control because we're calling the shots.
And we can revisit this, right?
We certainly can. If you want to change things. I'm amenable to it. Any directors have other comments?
Sounds good.
Seeing nodding heads.
Question.
Yes, please, Kevin.
I think we have 2 qualified people in the audience that probably could give us a lot of information about the marsh, almost like an expert. I think maybe at least one of those should be considered to be on the steering committee.
As an advisory or as a voting member?
Voting.
Then you almost need 2, wouldn't you? Because you don't really want to have
odd number.
You need an odd number, don't you?
Or we could keep it at 4 members from this committee, and then have 1 from 1 non-committee member.
If we got the 5 from here, and I wasn't thinking like you were thinking this year is not gonna be much, but there's gonna be an awful lot of work to do once we decide the work that we have to do. And those people can be a big help then.
I think that's where focus groups come in.
Yeah.
It really is. That's where we really
You just focus on traffic,
exactly. The expertise that they bring in certain areas.
Right. And, if we get stumped on, well, gee, why isn't this working? Mr. Krebs can probably help us all. That's where those people came in. I mean, you helped when we first started this.
I was on a water level.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody was a big help then, and there was a lot of expertise there, so.
There was at least 5 people in every focus group.
Yes.
Right. What did we call them back then?
Work groups. Yeah, study groups or something.
Yeah, so, and we met pretty often.
Often. Yes. Sometimes twice a month.
I remember being in the old town building down the road.
But it sounds like then we should go, it sounds gathering 5 board members to break tie votes. And yeah, the utilization of all the specialties is up to the board members to go out and draw into your particular group. As you find people with the specialties and you draw them into it. So yeah, ultimately I think because it's our backbone, I think we have to, we should provide the people to do the voting.
Kevin, to come back to what you said before, I think they kind of do make their way on, at least if this kind of a model is followed, because in here, the focus groups have a tech team leader, and the tech team leaders flow in as an advisory member on the steering committee. So that may be one where the steering committee, we resolve the steering committee has authority to create and utilize focus groups as they see fit. The focus groups are technical experts, just like we have technical experts on the steering committee from Point and these other organizations. So I think implicitly they get into the steering committee by virtue of the steering committee utilizing them through the work groups. And on a voting member standpoint, I guess if Kevin, your question was, if we keep it to, if we have the 5 town or 5 directors or voting members, but add an advisory or add an expert from the audience as a voting member, my counter argument would be, well, what makes that audience member more special than Kyle Herman or Brian Glenzinski at DU, who has a lot of implementation muscle? I'd argue I'd rather have a guy like that as a voting member than, and nothing wrong with any of the audience, but I like the vote, adding an extra vote with some sure muscle behind it is all I'm trying to say.
One question, do we not have both at large looking to be on the, I thought both of the at large wanted to be on the steering committee.
We haven't discussed that all the way.
Yeah, you two just lightly approached the topic at the beginning.
Right.
Yeah, so why don't we go there for now? Because we have 4 right now. Arm wrestle. Pardon?
I'm going to talk.
Please. Yes.
A long time ago, when we all had brown hair, we got together and we did all of this. And I think we tried to decide things with consensus. It wasn't a vote. It wasn't a yay or nay. It was, how are we moving forward with this? And so I think that you're focusing too much on, we have to have 5. So if we have three yeses and 2 noes. I don't want to have 3 yeses and 2 noes. I want to have 5, let's go forward.
Right.
And so to say that the people that have come tonight don't have, they shouldn't be part of it. They came tonight, they're going to come again. You came and you came and you came and you came. You came and you came and you came. So 20 years ago, we were trying to figure out how to do this. So I think you're stuck on, we have to have 5, so if we have to vote, we can't tie. Thank you.
Good point.
Thank you.
It is a good point. We didn't vote on anything before. We all came to consensus. You kind of voted it. I mean, I remember a little bit of a vote. Well, is it going to be a duck lake or a fishing lake? And we had decided with all the stuff and the studies we did that it was going to be a duck lake because it's never going to be but it was consensus. I mean, there were some people that still thought it should be a fish lake. But that's not what it pointed at. And there still are fish there.
There's a lot of things. Yeah.
So, I don't know, maybe we are off on the voting part of it. Maybe I don't know.
Well, the steering committee doesn't really have to do any voting per se now. Like once we leave tonight, we'll reconvene this summer sometime. And between now and then, I'll be collecting water samples. Stevens Point will be collecting sediment samples. State Lab of Hygiene will be testing them. Stantec will be quantifying muskrat activity, doing some hydrology mapping. Like everybody has their marching orders after this. The only real decisions that need to be made are the things that we deferred to the steering committee on, which were doing things like formulating the survey. So you could argue there's an element of voting there, but I'd also say, yeah, but it's kind of a consensus thing. If we're talking about it and say, here's some template questions, which ones feel good and which ones don't, I think the steering committee could probably do that with touch and feel and consensus. Same thing as far as setting up a date for an open house and things like that we have to do. I mean, there's decisions to be made, but it's not, do we do this to Rush Lake or we do that? It's like at the last meeting the gentleman said, we're opening a bar. Do we debate over whether we cover the seats with pleather or do we cover them with cloth? And it's like you just cover them and move on. So we could just defer on that for tonight and say we're not going to address voting. We'll just address who the parties are that are on the steering committee, that are like named on the steering committee, but grant the steering committee, we already did grant the steering committee the authority to create and utilize the focus groups as they see fit to help build that consensus. Yes, please, Mark.
As us being on the boards and having a spokesman basically for Utica in every town, these at-large bids could be the spokespeople for the public or the at-large basically. It could be their speaker at that meeting. That's kind of the way I see it. Because I can talk to Chuck about what I feel is going on, and he can bring it to you guys on the voting end. Where they are here, they want to have a say in what's going on too. It could also be one or both of these that are on the board. They could be their spokesperson. That's kind of one of my views.
It kind of works that way already with everything.
Well, that's what really puts you guys on as a spokesperson for,
right.
These people that want to be involved.
So what's the board want to do? Todd, Nancy?
I'd like to be part of it. Nancy'd like to be part of it. So,
do you have any problem with 6 of her?
No.
Let it fly. That sounds good. One of the concerns that came up, and I got it from Tom Davies at County Land and Water, and Kyle shared that it was a concern of Tracy at Wisconsin Wetlands Association, is like, what's the time commitment of these meetings going to be? Do we have to meet at the same place? Because Thursday night at 7 o'clock isn't going to work for regularly scheduled meetings. And the answer I've been telling people is, we don't have to. Stantec can set up a 1-800 dial-in number, and Kyle can call the number from Stevens Point, and whoever can call from Madison. And, if you're down in Oconomowoc, you can dial the number, and then we have a conference call, and maybe some of us get together in person, and the rest dial in. And we plan some full meetings along the way and go from there. So to add the extra 2, I don't know that it makes us less nimble, really. Right. So I'd support going that route.
I'll make a motion to do that now.
Sure.
To add 2 and make it 6.
I second.
Okay. Todd makes the motion to add 2 Rush Lake Watershed directors, which would be making it 6 Rush Lake Watershed Directors. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Any abstain? Okay, thank you. So we'll have 6 Rush Lake Watershed members, and the 4s that we have so far, myself, Art, Chuck, and Doug. But the way our conversation was going, Todd and Nancy would round out the 6. Any objections or concerns with that? Seeing heads shaking no. If not, we'll do that. So that would bring the total to 14, which includes 6 Rush Lake Watershed, and the other 8 potential spots are Ducks Unlimited, Stantec, Stevens Point, Wisconsin Wetlands Association, Winnebego County Land and Water, DNR, U.S. Fish and Wildlife.
Does DNR have 1? 2,
Surface Water and Wildlife if they want it.
Say that again?
Surface Water and Wildlife Department. Ted's in Surface Water and Ellen's Group's Wildlife.
I think that sounds good because, not all of them are going to be at every meeting. Some of them, the advisory people, are going to be in and out. I think they should be able to work fine with that number. Seems like a lot of people, but I think it'll be all right.
Okay. So we're at 14. Is any audience feedback on this? Where we have a steering committee of 14, but they'll use focus groups to the extent they see, and that's where we could have different focus groups, whether it's wildlife or you split out trapping separate from hunting and fishing. I don't know, that's where picking the right name or size might be benefited by having the technical members weigh in on it. But any audience feedback on what we've discussed here and where we're landing right now before we move on?
I would just like to ask something just to clarify for everybody in here and for the audience. What is the best way for the public to voice their concerns to the board in between meetings when we're not actually having a meeting and they're not actually here? Because I don't know if everybody knows a good way to get a hold of somebody here to voice their opinion.
Well, it's just concern. Like any other town board or government entity, well, not government, but to reach out to whoever the representative is. And I personally get a lot of calls about what certain times of the year it depends. High water, call. Low water, call. Different things going on, they call. And it's typically quizzing on why is that happening kind of thing.
Do all you guys out there have somebody that you know on the board that you can get a hold of and you have contact info?
Another option too is our website, rushlakewi.com, has a blank on the bottom where you can send a message off to us, and that message would currently get delivered to Seth and myself. I had set it up as the secretary and myself. I'll switch that over to you, Todd. But also too, people have messaged the organization through our Facebook page over time, and those are things where if somebody sends a message off, I get an alert on my phone that says somebody contacted Rush Lake on Facebook, or I got an email waiting for me from the website. So if nothing else, if somebody just moves here from some other place and says, I want to get into this, if they can use the internet and find us just by doing a Google search, they can get a hold of us somehow.
If they Google Rush Lake, Facebook page is going to come up, the website's going to come up,
Plus, we're planning outreach to the public by news articles and things like that too, so that's part of our intentions.
Are all of our names listed?
They're not, but it'd be very easy to do on the website.
Does anybody have an objection to that? Whether you have an email or a phone number, and that somebody looks up on our page. When I look under other organizations and stuff, they have listed, council directors, whatever, directors, and then everybody's listed. What their position is, etc. And people can reach out that way. Because more and more people are using the computer to do that.
Typically there's a point person that gets like a communications person, media type person that handles inquiries. But we don't have to do it that way. whoever wants to have their name and number out there, they can do that. Maybe you don't want your phone number out there.
Some of us were out there anyways, right?
Well, right.
So, I mean, in that regard, and maybe then somebody will look and recognize one of the names and have a question or whatever and just reach out to one of us in that regard, because they don't know how anyway.
Either an email address or a phone number.
Yeah.
I'll do whatever the board wants me to do, because I don't want to go posting 13 people's names and phone numbers, and all of a sudden you start getting robo-dialed from whatever.
That is what
I'd want to have each of you tell me it's okay before I do it. Like, I could list the names without contact information, so I know, Mark Davis from Utica. Okay, I know that guy.
Right.
I could do that and not put a number next to it.
Yeah, I would think that if you names, they'll say Utica, Rushford, and the people there, then, because actually at our town hall, and where we post, there are numbers are there also, but it wouldn't be that hard to find, but it doesn't need to be probably just too many other places.
I think the name in the township would be a good idea, because then if somebody really wants to, find your contact info, they probably can if they know your name and where you're from. Yeah. Or somebody might look on there and be like, I know this person through this other person, and now I can find a way to contact somebody on Rush Lake.
Well, if they're already looking online, they already have email. Computer access on the right. With that being said, my own personal, I would have no problem putting my email out there. I just wouldn't put the phone number. If somebody really wants to get hold of me, they're going to email me because they got a hold of it.
He's off the hook.
Well, how about this? I'll put everybody's names in the town on the website. And if you want me to disclose additional contact information for you, contact me after the meeting so that I make a proper note and follow up on it, because my stack of notes is immense and I don't trust myself to remember correctly afterward. So just grab me after if you want that. Anybody object now if you don't want me to list your name in town or at large position on the website? Okay. I'll list just the name and the township unless you contact me afterward and say, feel free to list more.
Brett, do you think you should list or put on one of the committees the present town board member, as long as Ron's not going to be there?
I don't understand your question, Bob. I'm sorry.
You're appointing the steering committee and members and so forth, and they're talking about calling somebody to call. Well, the town board members, maybe one of them should be on one of our committees. Ron knows more about it. Ask Ron.
I defer to you and Gary and Chuck, as you three are you're not you're not on the town board anymore.
No, I'm not.
So I guess I defer.
Is that what you're asking, Bob?
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to get.
If you look at the Nepieskin board, I'm not on there. I'm not
Right.
listed. Okay. Then it'll have to be listed separately. I've got no problem with that. So I can give Brett the okay to put my phone number and email address on there. That's fine with me.
Yours has been out there for years already, right?
That's right. So I don't know if that would be the only situation that we have that way. So we've got that covered.
Okay. I'll connect with you after.
I'm sure they get a better answer from you because the other ones don't know much about Rush Lake.
No. True.
They will shortly.
Okay. So I'll bring it back to, we're at 14. 2 at large from the directors here, 4 town appointments, 1 from each town, and then the other organizations I listed before for a total of 14. Steering committee will have authority to select members to fill the open seats. There's only 2. The steering committee also has authority to create and utilize focus groups as they see fit. And as I mentioned before, there should be an ability to work remotely, so we don't all have to convene at a meeting hall at a certain time whenever the organization would look to meet. Any further discussion on it? Otherwise, I think we have our answer. Okay, so the steering committee will have 14 members, as I just outlined, and it'll proceed after this meeting and take on the items that we delegated to the steering committee at the kickoff meeting and work to tackle those in the most appropriate manner with consensus. Also, at the last meeting, Ted talked about the importance of having ground rules set for the steering committee. I personally just view that as that's for the steering committee to figure out once they meet to make sure that they can play nice together. Okay. Anything further on steering committee? Otherwise, we'll move on to the other item of the lake management planning section of the meeting. No? Okay. We'll move on to the proposals for aquatic plant surveys this year. Before we begin, I have a few introductory remarks that I promise will be brief. We received proposals from Cason and Associates and Wisconsin Lake and Pond Resource for our plant surveying. The budget that's contemplated in our planning grant application is a total cost in this phase of the project of $6,000. Should we contract work that's in excess of $6,000, we would be paying for that work out of pocket, which we have money in the treasury that can help support that. But we'll be going for a second phase of the planning grant next year. So personally, my view is that we needn't bite off more than we can chew this year. So if there's parts of the aquatic plant survey that can be deferred to phase 2 of the grant, or perhaps, like Ted had mentioned at the last meeting, if we can work with county on some drone imagery at a low price point, perhaps there's a way to get more bang for our buck this year or kick the can to the next grant cycle. So for the two proposals, I've circulated those in advance of this meeting. In my review of the proposals, they seem largely the same, except for this fee page. And before we get any further, I want to speak about a phone call that I had this morning with Brad Roost of Cason and Associates. Brad, are you here tonight? Hi, Brad. Thanks for coming. So I just want to recap our conversation because I told Brad this morning that at a price of $13,200 we might have sticker shock, and I wanted to assess whether we could detangle the must-haves from phase 1 of the plant survey from the nice-to-haves. And in that conversation, we talked about how the point intercept survey, it'd be conducted like it was in 2008. It'd be conducted within the boundaries of the dense cattail beds that are in a lot of the lake. But also there's additional services in there, like a meandering boat survey through channels that go off into other parts of the lake, and also a winter mapping, which those items are all spiked out separately on the proposal. And Brad, jump in if I say anything that's off the map, or just doesn't ring true. But if we look at the cost page from Brad, the first line item, point intercept plant survey and data entry, that addresses everything that's within those dense cattail beds. That's inside the lake where the water is clearly water and it's not just a sea of cattails. That second item, emergent floating leaf plant survey, that's the meandering survey that would go down channels like the mile-long channel to the North Boat Landing and things like that, inventorying that. In our conversation, we discussed that that item was something that we could defer to a phase 2 of the planning cycle and thusly remove it from the proposal. And also the fall-winter line item for emergent plant survey, that's a nice to have that we can defer and hope to solve with our partners at the county or defer to a second phase of the grant in 2020. And the fourth line item for data analysis, map development, and report writing, with the exclusion of the two items that I just mentioned, that item could be cut in half. And that final item for meeting attendance and presentation, that's a placeholder. That's something that could be billed on a time and materials basis as needed. And honestly, if we had the report written for what the findings were, that might be something that the steering committee could run with without any further meeting support or interpretation. So that might go away completely, or maybe it's a few extra bucks. So anyways, the proposal as was originally provided was over 13,000, but after we make the modifications to strike the second and third line item, cut the fourth in half, and strike the fifth, that brings the total proposal down to 5,700. But in speaking with Brad, I asked we're talking very quickly on the phone this morning about how we can make a number that might cause sticker shock be something that could fit within our budget. What's something that you could be comfortable not exceeding? And what Brad, you told me this morning was keeping it at 6,000 or under. You felt very comfortable with that, especially if navigation wasn't a concern on the lake. And my comment to that was the equipment that they'd be using, outboard motors, if weeds got caught in the crop or whatever, it could be an issue, but I'd be more than happy to loan my boat to them to use, which they could load a canoe in, so they could use that around the lake because it's a surface drive that can handle the vegetation we have. So I think between donated equipment, whether it's myself or other board members who have equipment that they might be willing to loan, we'd be able to alleviate any navigational concerns that you would have. So with that, that's the conclusion of the remarks I wanted to make on the Cason proposal. Brad, do you have any remarks you'd like to make at this time? As I'd like you to make those, and then allow the board to make any questions of you of the proposal before we proceed.
Sure. So I think when we first went into this, we were proposing it as a one-phase. When we first went into it, we were assuming it was a one-phase project where we do both the submerging and immersion plant surveys. Once the grant results were available, and we talked to you about possibly doing it becoming a two-phase project, then we decided to discuss further splitting into two more affordable projects. So that means the submergent, the point intercept survey, the duplicate of the survey that was done in 2008, and then the emergent cattail framework type survey done separately, but also in two stages. So I know in 2008, so there's about less than 800 points sampled or mapped on the across the lake, and there's maps in the proposal. In 2008, less than half of them were actually reachable by boat because of the dense plant cattail growth. So we're assuming it's going to be a similar case this year. So that we built that into the price estimate. So.
Does anyone have any questions for Brad?
Brad, how many points is the proposal?
For the point intercept survey?
Yeah, 781.
Yeah, there's 781, and in 2008, I think 319 points are reachable by boat.
Well, what's the distance between points?
It is 120 meters. So they're pretty spread out.
How many feet?
Over a football field.
100 feet.
Okay.
120 meters. About 100 feet. You said 120 meters. Isn't that about 98?
400 feet? It's bigger than I am. Bigger than meters, 39 inches.
Yeah.
So that's pretty point.
Yeah.
What you're saying.
Yeah. It's a giant grid.
Yeah.
That grid, Nancy, is in the proposal. I'm not sure the page, but
Thank you.
any other questions for Brad?
Will you attempt to identify the points before you go out to mark that or to do the survey?
The points are already established. The DNR establishes where
Right.
the points are and provides all the GPS coordinates to us. So
There's
Are you
almost
going to do quadrants?
there's almost
or
800
something?
points, and you're going to do roughly half, correct?
Right.
So of those roughly 400,
yeah.
How do you identify where do you target that?
Well, essentially, once you're on the water, you keep going along the grid lines.
All right.
And once you get the cattails, or vegetation is too dense, then
Got it.
turn around and go.
So we're just starting point B, the first one?
Yeah, wherever the boat landing is.
Okay.
Start there and work our way across to the lake, so. Does that make sense? Or
Yes.
answer the question? Okay. I mean, ahead of time, we can take aerial photos and try to estimate which subset of points would be sampled, but for our purposes, we wouldn't need to know that ahead of time. Just what can you reach when you're on the water? So.
The only reason I ask is because there may be some locations that you think you can't reach.
Yeah.
And there's ways to reach them.
Okay.
That are not, you have to get out of your boat or do anything. There's trails out there that can get you to certain places.
Okay.
And I don't even know if that's needed. But that's why I asked the question.
Okay.
How do you pick where you go?
Right. So you're saying there's isolated pockets of open water that aren't reachable?
Especially after the last spraying that was done out there. Okay. Absolutely. There's places in the middle of the lake that are accessible if you know how to get to them.
Okay. Then I guess I would rely on the board just to kind of help identify those.
Sure, and that's why I'm asking, because we can help with that.
And Ellen's provided us aerial imagery from last summer of some of those spray areas, so you can identify how wet they appear from an airplane and if there's a viable way to get there.
Our pilots fly all the time. We call it they're searching for fire, and they'll run past Rush Lake and take pictures for us. So we can get on. But they're not to scale. That's the one issue. It's not a. I mean, they're just basically flying over, click, click, click.
Okay.
Any other?
There are other ways to get images of Rush Lake. So
a lot of it, the current GPS, even if it's a year or two old, that comes up on whatever you're reading, is going to show a lot of the trails.
Okay.
But if you just come up to an area, it's like, now we got it there might be something right on the other side.
Yeah. A lot of the county GIS websites provide relatively recent aerial photos.
Sure. Thank you.
Any other questions for Brad?
I have just one fun one. The rake test for density, how far do you pull that rake on the bottom? Just
a short distance. Well,
it's this consistent measured distance.
Yeah. So because it's shallow here, there's two methods. When it's shallow enough, use a long pole, a rake, the double-headed rake on a long pole. In deeper waters, if we're doing a survey on like one of the pothole lakes where that rake doesn't reach the bottom, it's a rake head on a rope. And you drag it a short distance. On the pole, you basically put it down and twist it and pull it up. So you're not dragging.
Okay, so it's consistent measure, but it's basically an estimated. It doesn't have.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there's protocols that the DNR establishes for every part of that survey. So.
Good. Okay, thanks.
Any other questions for Brad? If not, thank you for your proposal and helping us walk through peeling it down to an essential versus nice to have list of services that we would need at this time. Should we select you, I would expect you to resubmit a new proposal to delineate the phasing of the project, and we'd accept that once it was submitted. Okay. Thank you, Brad.
Do you want me to hang out or?
That's up to you. Second proposal is from Wisconsin Lake and Pond Resource. Jim Charles, are you here this evening?
I'm here.
Hey, Jim. Would you like to make any remarks on your proposal and then offer yourself for questions, if you like?
Sure. Pretty standard. I think Brad covered it pretty well. We'll get to whatever we can, open water. I last did this in 2008. I actually was with Northern Environmental at that time, changed names, went to a different company, yada yada, here I am now. We probably would utilize our watercraft. We have access to new if possible, much like 2008. Surface drive we do not have. If you have one that's available, we greatly appreciate it. We did use a different one in 2008 to kind of map perimeter of the bulrush beds and whatnot. It's pretty well self-standard. I think Brad did a pretty good job of explaining how we get to where we get, the process of the aquatic plant survey, and how we do it. So if there's any questions on my proposal, sure.
Are you doing the rake system as well?
Yep, that's standard DNR protocol. Every point intercept survey follows that method.
I've had talked outside of the meeting with a number of directors just about the TBD nature of the whole lake point intercept with a drone enhancement. Would you just take a minute to delineate like what's included in the 5880 that you're proposing versus what's in the TBD?
Yep, the 5880 is just the point intercept survey and the report that is associated with it. So it'd be the actual field work, go out to the sample points, collect the data, and then be the office work to assess the data, compare it to 2008, see what the big changes were. We would provide maps of all the species found, like 2008, and then a summary of it with brief management recommendations, but not to step on the toes of the tasks and the following work that's going to happen the next year. So it kind of just be a piece of the overall puzzle that's going on. And the drone TBD, I just offered that services because it kind of came up in passing when we had a phone discussion that we were possibly looking at doing that. It's an opportunity we do offer. Right now it's very hard to say how much that would be just because there's a few unknowns on that. With any kind of drone, it's all autonomous. You set a course, flies its own. The variables are how far up in the air we need to be to properly identify species, especially the native and non-native Phragmites. It could be 100 feet up in the air, it could be 300 feet up in the air. The higher up in the air we're able to get, the faster and more efficient we'll be able to map the areas because we cover a larger swath. Your camera's looking down, you're looking at more area, and you're up 300 feet, say, than versus 100 feet. So the higher you get, the less time you need to map it. And also the other TBD is how much of an area are we looking at mapping. Obviously, we wouldn't fly the drone over areas mapped during the point intercept survey because we had boots on the ground. We know what's there. We physically identified it in the end. So we would remove all areas directly surveyed during the point intercept method from the drone. But until we do the PI survey, we don't know, is it 5 acres? Is it 200 acres of brush lake we're removing? The more we can remove, obviously, the shorter time the drone's got to be in the air and the less cost it would be. So there's too many unknowns to put a cost on it at this time.
Do you charge per hour?
It would probably be on a per hour basis, yes, and that all depends. We would figure out the mapping area, we would set up how high we want to be. The computer system calculates out the paths, and then it would also give us an estimated time to completion based on how fast the drone can fly to cover everything. So once we know all that, we can put it into there. It'll take out the approximate field time to do that.
Is there any detail lost the higher you go, like magnification, the more distorted things are? Does that have anything to do with higher? Also, does that play a role at all?
It's still a clear picture. It's just instead of say you're flying over a cornfield, you can see it's a field of corn. But if you get down low enough, you can count the ears on each corn stalk essentially. So that's what you're losing between height and aerial. You're looking at in big green areas. You know it's Phragmites. You can't tell if it's native or non-native. When you drop down, say another 50 feet, then you can kind of discern based on coloring, and because the native's going to die back a little bit easier or a little bit earlier, so it'll be brown color.
Which is what we're considering, just keeping in mind for us too, because the higher we go, we don't have that kind of detail then, correct? Mm-hmm. Which the higher we go, the bigger area we get, doesn't cost us as much time. If we need to be more detailed, we don't know to discuss. Okay, so just kind of putting that out there. So just kind of keep that in mind.
County
what
Land
detail do we need, etc.
County Land and Water has made those same remarks. When
Okay.
I spoke with Tom Davies, their director, he said there is an opportunity that we could work together on drone imagery, but there's a lot to be determined as far as elevation and what kind of analysis do you want, because there's a big difference between a flyover with imagery that you have your botanist, Melissa Curran, interpret, and I fly it a lot lower and I make a 2-scale map and I map it all for you. That's real time that I'm going to charge you for. So that was that rings true. I have one question just about the phasing, and then I think I want to kick it back to Brad too, because I would expect that we're going to select somebody. I mean, we put in our grant application, we're going to select somebody, and let's say county says the drone that we could do, it's not going to serve our needs for whatever reason. Just follow along with me. So we're going to go into our 2020 grant application saying we want to do a phase 2 plant survey for the cattail beds and the Phragmites that's out on the periphery of the lake to make sure if it's invasive, we can document it and we can begin treating it as quickly as possible so it doesn't become a new problem. So we're going to be back where we are next year, and we may have an opinion then, and I'm not saying we do now, that, you know what, we worked with this guy last year. It'd be real easy for them to integrate 2020 into their 2019 report, and we have a more cohesive result at the end of it. So could you speak you spoke for a moment about the 2020 drone imagery or the drone imagery that could be done down the line once there's monies available for it? Because I'd venture to guess we don't have monies available for it this year. So I'd just like you to speak about that and how that would integrate into your phase 1 of the report. And then I'd come to Brad to say, tell me the same thing. What would your boots onto the ground periphery thing? And in your proposal, it was a by foot survey over the winter. Kind of bridge that to the phase 1 that we talked about just before, and also if there's other alternatives in your tool bag. And that's a question for both of you, because you said I have a drone, but I can do it in the winter by foot or whatever. Just help tell the tale for us.
Yeah, essentially the phase 1 would be get what we can from the water. Phase 2 would be like peeling back the curtain, the cattails with the drone. We'd be able to see what's beyond that, because phase 1 would essentially just delineate where the cattails come into and we can't go past. Phase 2 would look over the top, basically expand upon what we did on phase 1, identify what's back in the cattails where we can't physically get to on an easy scale by foot or by boat. Be more efficient that way, and again, just give us a bigger, broader overview of what's in the majority of the lake. Because in the end of this, the open water is a pretty small portion of it, comparatively.
Okay. Brad, will you speak to that, please?
I concur with the phase 1, the open water point intercept survey is going to be impeded by essentially the boundary of those emergent beds of cattails. So while we're doing those surveys and we encounter those cattails, we can identify those boundaries. We can mark waypoints even. But it's the areas further inland that we can't see well enough to identify between the invasive and the native species that we would need to come later. So what we had originally proposed when it was a single phase was delineate the water's edge sort of cattail areas in the summer while we're doing the point intercept survey, come back in the winter when we can, by foot, walk around and identify the remaining areas. So similar approach, just different technique.
But in your phase 1, you would delineate those peripheral areas.
We would expect to,
Do they have hours? I know I read it all, I recall it. They have a lot of X amount of hours.
I haven't seen it. Why don't you ask?
Have you budgeted X amount of hours for the project?
Yeah, with each line item, we have kind of a standard hourly rate that we are estimating how long it would take to do those surveys. So based on previous experience.
So what is that number?
The hourly, it's $125.
No. How many hours have you budgeted? So I just do the math and figure it out.
Right.
It's a pretty big job.
Yeah.
And then if
especially
you
in a canoe.
Well, and then if you end up doing later on foot.
Well, that's a separate.
Granted.
And with any of these projects, whether it's Rush Lake or any other lake, we're going into it, we have to propose and estimate how much time we think it's going to take. So, sometimes
And how many people are you dealing with to do these things?
Typically 2 people for a plant survey.
Okay.
Plus volunteers are always open to have people on the lake. interest in coming out on the water with us, they're welcome.
Todd calculated 47 hours. Does that seem like a reasonable hour commitment?
For the PI survey?
It's phase, it's total.
Oh, total?
Phase 1 and 2.
Oh, you're using the wrong proposal.
I'm on the wrong one. I'm on yours.
And we'll come to you with Todd's hour question.
Well, keep in mind too, for like a point intercept survey, we're not only taking into account the time in the field, but the data entry and
Let's do it out. Yeah, right. Should be pretty close.
$48.
Jim, do you have a hour estimate to answer Todd's question?
Task 1 for the point intercept survey. It really depends how quick we can go. In a perfect world, say for example, point intercept survey is doing 350 points. That would usually be a day and a half in the field. So we're looking at anywhere 8 to 12 hours on the water for Rush Lake. I'd expect probably closer to 12, so it's maybe a little bit slower between points depending on navigation. Task 1 also includes mobilization and equipment costs rolled into that. Task 1 includes mobilization and equipment costs, so our whole 2-person crew out there to do it. The following tasks for writing the management report, the mapping, all that other stuff. I don't have that number off the top of my head. I have that back at the office and can provide it. I want to say between mapping, the report writing, data comparison, it's all going to be in the neighborhood of 20 plus to complete. Get that all done. Give or take a few.
Doesn't seem right. Any other questions? I have but one.
No, I have a question, Jim. In looking your front page proposal and under background, you mentioned mechanical harvesting plans and manual harvesting, spraying and so forth. What means and what could you accomplish with mechanical or whatever kinds available for you to get rid of some cattails?
I mean, that all depends what we see out there. Cattails are a big bear. Most of my mechanical harvesting experience, our background is just a brief company background, our mechanical harvesting is mainly for submerged aquatic plants. So if you ever are, say, like on Lake Montello, Blue Madison Chain of Lakes, you see those big blue machines with the paddle wheels on the side with the sickle bars. They're mechanical harvesters. They're cutting and removing dense submerged aquatic plants from the water. So that's kind of where my harvesting planning is. As for mechanical harvesting on Rush Lake, I think it'd be ridiculously expensive and would accomplish very little, to be honest.
That's the point of the lake management plan, so that we can put that roadmap down for which arrows we pull out of the quiver, and then go for implementation grants to do them. I have one question. What's your view on overages as it relates to the fees we spoke about tonight? Any overages would come directly out of our treasury, and as we look forward to the next year and needing to provide a local share and provide that skin in the game component from the treasury, I'm in protect the treasury mode this year because we'll need it next year. So either you, what's the likelihood of an overage, and if there was, how would that process work if there were to be one, and if you could assess a likelihood?
At least on our end, likelihood of an overage probably low. If necessary, we would have to submit a change order, an addendum to it. I would hope we wouldn't have to, and I don't anticipate having to.
Yeah, I think same thing. Going into this project, because it's a shallow, weedy lake, part of the unknown was how much time it would take to do these surveys. So I kind of took that into account. If it was an easier open water lake with the same number of points, it would go quicker, but so I took that into account. I don't expect that we would go over. If there was something where getting into the project, we could tell that it was going to take more time than we thought, that we would take that time then to discuss that with you before proceeding.
Okay. Does anybody else have any other questions? Otherwise, I think we're at the point where we've gotten all the info we will be getting before we would need to make a decision. Any other further questions for Jim or Brad? If not, we could vote to select one tonight if the board's comfortable. If not, we'd be kicking the can down the road, and we're running out of time. The survey is going to be done in the summer, and I don't know if it would change between now and our next meeting, or if we'd have to hold a special meeting to vote on this. So I'd be a proponent of voting this evening. I'll make a motion to vote on it this evening.
Just a question. Actually, these come in pretty well ducks for ducks across all what we have in case.
Mm-hmm. Yep, they're both right at budget, a few $100 under for both. So I made the motion to vote on it tonight. Seconded to vote on the motion tonight. All in favor? Any further discussion on that? Otherwise, we'll vote to vote. So, all in favor of voting tonight to select our partner for the aquatic plant management, aquatic plant survey?
Aye.
All in favor? Aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstain? All right, we'll vote. We could either do it by hands, or since we're all about ballots now, I've got these handy dandy checkbox ballots that I could spread around, because I appreciate both of you coming, and whatever the outcome of the vote would be, I don't want there to be any bad feelings, because you both presented a credible and viable alternative that each have merits, and I for one appreciate it. Thank you. So, should we use these, or just do a hand vote?
Why don't you?
We'll just pass them out. Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, fellas.
Coming out. That should be 6. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay.
Jim is the same guy that did it before?
Mm-hmm. He's on the report. His name's on the report. He authored it.
$125 an hour. Divided by the $6,000. The $5,700.
That's what he does.
I can do those kinds of numbers. He does the fancy numbers.
The question. He worked for. He helped do the first survey.
Yeah.
With Northern Environmental.
Right.
Yep.
Lincoln Pond.
Say that again. That was
Correct.
Jim Charles from Wisconsin Lake and Pond Resource was the author of our 2008 plant survey, because he worked for Northern Environmental at the time. He did the work, he wrote the report.
So were we happy with that report? Seems like we maybe weren't.
well, we were happy because we thought we were getting all these points checked out, and as you see, it was what 381 is when he got all done. And I think I wrote a check for somewhere around $8,000 at that time.
It's going to be the same this time.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Except it's cheaper.
That was after the drawdown. You got to remember that was after the drawdown.
Right.
And the putting the water back in.
Revegetation.
Yeah. What I don't remember is did we do one prior to doing anything?
I think we did because
There
wasn't much out there.
Yeah, I think they kind of looked and said, okay, we got 200 acres of open water right here with nothing on it.
They did it though because they mapped the beds of bulrush on the front end, and they had a a numerical comparison of acreage of the lake covered by what species were present. So they did do that the first time. I know they did. I read it in the report.
Prior to...
Yes. I don't remember the year, but they did one before the drawdown, pre-restoration.
Okay.
They did a point intercept.
Yeah.
And they got almost everywhere. There were still like 30 or 50 points they couldn't access then, but they did it.
I didn't remember that.
All right, if you've got your votes tallied, if you send them to the center to me, I'll just tally them. Nor would I. That'd be a job. That's how you get Buff Farms.
Well, you just gotta get one of those little weedy motor powered launch shafts to put on your canoe.
I have a throwing motor on my boat, and it only works sometimes.
Yeah.
She wants to refill it out.
Okay. I have the votes tallied. I will announce the results. There were 10 votes for Wisconsin Lake and Pond Resource and 3 votes for Cason and Associates. There were no abstains. So with that, we've selected Wisconsin Lake and Pond Resource with 10 votes when 7 of the 13 were needed. And I'll be in touch with Jim to get the contract taken care of. Did anybody have any questions on the terms that I should address with him? When I reviewed the terms of their contract, it's just the last 2 pages. There was nothing that stood out in there to me, and there certainly was nothing that differed from what we reviewed for Stantec. So I'm very comfortable to sign this as written without further modification. So I'd just say I'd make a motion to accept the contract as proposed.
I'll second.
Motion was made and seconded to accept the Wisconsin Lake and Pond Resource proposal, the contract as proposed. Any further debate or discussion? If not, we'll vote for it. All in favor of my signing this proposal and making it the contract? All in favor? Aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstain? I will work with Jim and get that signed. Thank you. Okay, excellent. We are on to agenda item 6, other updates. Ron, would you please give us an update on water levels at the dam?
Okay, I will start at approximately early January. I believe at our January meeting I gave a written report for 2018. Again, the middle of the winter, I've got on the 18th of January a water level of 1.5. Gates were partially open at that time. Most of the gates were open, several were partially closed. And of course we freeze up, we ice up, so February 11th we're right on target at 1.4. Go a month later, and this is coming up now on the rapid thaw on March 14th. We're at 1.3. At that time, I had some unexpected surgery and a hospital stay, and I drove over to Brett's house and I gave him the tools and I said, "Here, Brett, here you go." So, on almost a daily basis, due to the flooding that was going on, Brett monitored things, operated the dam. So on March 15th, it was at on March 14th, it was at 1.3, just slightly below our target. March 15th, 1.55. The next day, on March 16th, 0.7 higher, over 8 inches higher at 2.25. March 17th, 2.35. March 18th, 2.4. March 19th, 2.5. Then we finally start to recede on March 20th, 2.4. 2.3 on the 21st. 2.25 on the 22nd. 2.2 on the 23rd. So, into the 24th, 2.1, the 25th, 2.1, 26th, 2.05. 3 days later, the 29th, 1.95, April 2nd, 1.8, April 7th, 1.6, April 10th, 1.4, April 12th, 1.5. I took over on the 16th, on Tuesday, 1.5, and on the 17th, 1.4. Along the way, Brett cleared a lot of bogs that had come in front of the gates, and I had a very, very large one, which I had some help with clearing, 2 gates wide and probably 6 feet or so deep. Took 2 hours to cut that thing up and get the pieces through, but that was on the 16th and 17th, so the last 2 days. Anyway, that's the report. I think it was a valuable experience for Brett, although he's very busy, and I'm sure usually had to take the kids down there along with him to do it, but I think it was probably very interesting for him to see how it reacts in a very rapid spring thaw situation, and I don't know if he feels the same, but maybe he can comment.
I'm very glad you gave me the opportunity to participate. It was incredibly illuminating to see it on a daily basis, and I can boil it down to one thing. Perhaps the first day I checked it, it was 1.3, and on that day, Island Road, on my drive, Island Road had water on it like it rarely does, especially since the road's been now built up. And driving down Mountain Road, which is a gravel road, it easily had water coming across the road in a half dozen or more spots for large stretches. And I can't remember ever seeing Mountain Road that flooded. Yet despite all that flooding, the dam was under the 1.4 upper bound threshold. So in the areas surrounding the lake with extreme flooding that I haven't seen anything like that, but I've only been around for 10 years. The dam, if you went strictly by the gauge at the dam, it would have told you everything was great. But the next day when I showed up, it was not so great. And some of the gates were frozen in at the time, so I was able to get them open, which made me feel quite relieved. And to see it go down roughly a half an inch per day, it was nice to see that happen in a somewhat linear fashion. So thank you, Ron. I appreciate being of service to it, and it's an experience that I'm sure will benefit me in other ways in the future with the organization or perhaps the town.
Okay.
Question. It's probably the first time in my lifetime I've ever seen a fast melt like that. I don't know if anybody else. I've never seen this.
Was it? Yeah.
I agree.
And are we still at full?
Gates are full top draw. And, yesterday we're right on target at 1.4. So, which surprised me a bit that it did go down to that level. I expected it to stay a bit higher, a bit longer, but if you look around and you look at the drainage ditches, the creeks and so on, even though there are ponds of water out in the field, the ditches seem to be relatively low.
We haven't had a whole lot of moisture since then.
Correct. So,
this has to tell you how much those marshes can hold, though. I mean, think if all that water had been going directly into that lake. That would have been well over what. But, those marshes slowed it down enough that it could take care of itself. It always amazes me how much they can hold. Figure how many thousand acres are out there, and even if they hold an inch of water, it's a lot of gallons. So.
It was washing out Bahn Road,
That's a big
which, since it's been rebuilt, when did they rebuild that? 2-3 years ago?
2 years ago.
Chuck?
Yeah.
I believe it was only a year or two ago.
It was 2 years ago, I believe.
2 years ago? You lifted it.
Lifted it up.
How far?
I don't know the exact amount I would lift it up, but we added that fabric underneath there, and it's just amazing to see how much that's changed. You no longer have them large craters in it.
Yeah.
The mud isn't forcing itself up.
Right. It didn't, it was doing that, and like on Bradley Road, we were having them frost boils and stuff, and it's not, well, since that's been blacktop, it's not noticeable. But we had spots where we stopped, and then a frost boil, because there was all it was seal coat, and it just turning that all back to gravel, basically. But I guess the town of Amro had a number of places, because they have a lot of stuff that's not so good. But we were just totally amazed at what that fabric or mesh that they put underneath there has done for Mountain Road. It's just a huge thing.
I go down that road quite often. I'm betting you didn't add 6 inches to that road.
It wasn't no more than 6 inches.
Yeah. But they put some bigger stone down, they put the gravel over the top.
And then
that's what washed off now is that the light gravel, which we saw today.
Mm-hmm. Because we had that, and then on Job Road, which is Mark Davis's area there, some had washed down the road there, and Mark has quite a little gravel in his field, and which they'll be getting that out of there when possible.
When you were talking Mountain Road there, rebuilding that, is that the area where they used to dip perch out of there?
Yes.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And at that time, did you lower the culvert? That was
culvert.
That's been
long.
That's been a while ago already when that was lowered.
That was a while ago.
Yes.
But they say that's why the perch came up, because the water dropped, and they put the air in there, and now it doesn't.
Now it doesn't.
Now it doesn't do that, yeah.
But I don't know. Somebody else said that the perch can't get up there because
That's true. It clogged up with the restoration. It really did. It stopped the flow, and everything just kind of went out into the marsh then instead of a flow going straight in.
See, even my ditch doesn't have minnows anymore. It always had minnows in it. There hasn't been minnows in there for a long time.
But now since the spray, and it's opened up, just this last year is the first time I could drive a boat all the way up to
You're saying maybe that's going to come back.
It's opened it up.
And maybe the perch are going to be able to...
It's got a ways to go for that. It could use a little swamp devil help. Yeah. But that's not saying we would do that, but it doesn't flow like it used to. It just doesn't. But it's getting better.
Yeah.
Because you couldn't drive in there before they sprayed, or whoever, the state sprayed. And now it's been 2 years, and it's meandering like this instead of a straight shot, but once you get into there, you can make pretty far.
Okay. Any questions for Ron on the water level management? Otherwise, we'll move on. Don't have a ton left. Nothing significant. Time commitment wise, that is. Okay. So I'll move on to winter carp monitoring. That one, I watch the South Channel just about every day. I personally never saw a carp in the channel. For what reason that might be, whether there's bogs in the way or what, I don't know, but I never saw a single one. In the past week, Doug took Ron and I down to Waukau Dam to take a look at how the carp could use the Waukau Dam area, and throughout the flooding season, the Waukau Dam washed out to a degree, and there was a risk that carp could come up if they were present, but through the efforts of Doug, Bruce, Ron, and myself, watching the Waukau Dam and carp pond, we were able to ensure that if carp came up, which they didn't, that we could we could put a snow fence across the dam at Rush Lake to prevent them from entering. Fortunately, we didn't have to do that. not a real big deal, but it would accumulate debris and be a real chore to get out. So anyways, there's winter carp monitoring there as well, and it was of no concern.
Just for information, I've been kind of watching down there this week, 2 or 3 times I've been down there. I was down there tonight. There's still, I don't believe there's any carp in there. When I was going through some of my records, I think it was 3 years ago, the carp were in there on the 22nd of March.
Mm-hmm.
So
was the water
really
warmer?
It
check
had to
the
be
temperature?
It had to be the reason. Warmer water and more flow going through. Yeah. Yeah. But it really
Can we
Which
just
one did
put
you
a
say that was
fence
3 years
in, or do we need a permit for that?
We could if it's a temporary thing. Ellen and I talked about it as a thing, and if it was a permanent thing, that's one thing. But if it's, they're here and we drop it in, that's a different thing. But it's it collects debris, which is the real problem. So I've got I'll come back to that because there's a potential opportunity there, and I'll mention that later with an other item that's there. But from a current carp monitoring standpoint, that's that. Nothing else on that for now. We'll move on to other matters. Okay, so other matters. I had identified, and we had identified this at a previous meeting, that we could brainstorm about Rush Lake Watershed Restoration membership. There's a placeholder in our bylaws in Article 2 that allow us to create a membership function. That's something that we could charge for, and we could have a number of benefits. We talked about it for a prolonged period at a previous meeting, and it's something that would require some more time than I think we probably want to commit at 10 after 9 tonight. I have a few ideas on things that, we talked about, well, what could a member get? Well, the biggest item that came forward from the insurance recommendation that Todd and I worked on is that members of Rush Lake Watershed get covered under our general liability insurance. So what I would like to advocate is that if we have volunteers, whether they're on the steering committee, they're on a work group that supports the steering committee, they're helping us at the brat fry or another fundraiser or whatever, that they are, so somebody's helping us. We accept them helping us, like we want them there. They're not just somebody walking in off the street and we don't want them there, but there's somebody that we want, we're working with them, that they receive an automatic membership designation so that they're included in our insurance coverage. So our bylaws specify that if someone petitions the board to become a member, they can be voted on by the board. But I'd just go ahead and say, for tonight, let's not change the bylaws per se, but I would just make a motion that any volunteer approved to and working at a Rush Lake Watershed sanctioned event receive automatic membership designation for the benefits of having them covered by our general liability insurance that we just bought.
Did we discuss that with the insurance company about adding more people?
Yeah, it's updated annually. When you do your renewal, they ask you how many members you have. So all of the directors are considered members for the purposes of that insurance. And then the members that you have helping you, fall into the calculation. It amounted to, I don't know if you remember the number, but I want to say it was like $3 a member or something like that if you took it like linearly. So there's an incremental cost, but it was really nothing.
Okay.
So you're saying a one-day volunteer would become a member permanently?
Annually, maybe?
Annually, I could see doing.
Well, he's there for one function, he's covered for that function.
Yeah. Essentially, that's it.
That function only?
Just that one day. Is that was
That's
for
my
detail
question.
here. Yeah.
For the activity in question.
Well, actually, once they're insured for that one function, they're going to be insured for the rest of the year.
Why do you say that?
Because that's
How
how
are
the
you going to
premium
keep
works.
us for the one?
But that's
Because
how
the policy's in effect.
Yeah. Once you name them, they're on for the whole year.
I think so.
That's
Yeah,
how
they've been added to the roster.
Yeah. How do you put one person on and take them off? The same day. Well,
Can they be
Fired.
When we have these events for grant reporting, I have to keep a listing of everybody who participated. That essentially becomes the list, and when the new year starts, we hit the reset button, and our member list goes to 0, and we can address a more broad membership function at a later meeting. Which is why I made the motion to get them considered to be a member to allow the insurance to clearly extend to them. It provides no other benefit whatsoever other than to denote them as a member, which gets them protected. You know, Dewey, you come and work at the brat fry, and somebody says, "That's the guy who served me the bad brat." I want to go to the insurance guy and be like, "Dewey's a member. He was helping us. He was helping us with our outreach. Help us. That's why we have the insurance."
I'm comfortable with that. That's fine.
Sure. Okay.
There's not going to be that many names.
No.
There might be a handful. That'd be fine.
Motion.
Okay, so motion is made and seconded that any volunteer that's approved to and working at a Rush Lake Watershed sanctioned event receive automatic membership as it relates to the project and underlying the insurance plan. Any further debate?
Second to begin with?
We had a second, yes.
We had a second?
Yes.
Okay.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstain? I thank you. That carries unanimously. I would prefer to table any further discussion of a more robust membership function to a later meeting. Put it on the tail end of our summer meeting, and if we get through it, we'll get through it. You okay? Okay. Table it. Next agenda item, fundraising opportunities. And this is a quick one also. Our brat fry is Saturday, June 1st at Webster's. We need volunteers. Art was a tremendous, has been a tremendous contributor to our brat fries, and unfortunately for us, he'll be catching some big walleyes in northern Canada at the time of the brat fry. So I've got a sign-up sheet on the podium. If you sign up tonight, great. If not, we might not see each other until after the brat fry. So Saturday, June 1st at Webster's. Sign-up sheets on the podium. Second, fundraising opportunity, Cause of the Mondays. This is an event that we were fortunate enough to be included on last year. It's at Vines and Rush's Winery. It's an event where we help promote dinner service on the Monday night in question. And for all the food sales that they have, a contribution of that comes back to Rush Lake Watershed Restoration. Last year, that percentage was 25% of food sales, which amounted to a few $100 that and some promotion. So that one is scheduled for Monday, June 17th during dinner service. That one I don't need a ton of volunteers for. It'd basically be I set up the info table and I'd stand there.
June 17th.
June 17th.
Monday, June 17th. Yep. So I'd just be standing. Dinner service, so probably like 4:30 to
4 to 8.
Yeah. 8. Start tearing down at a little after 8.
Where's that at from?
Vines and Rush's Winery on the just south of here on County Highway E.
Prolix Farm.
We're going to kind of do what we did last year.
Yep. Info table, and
I'm going to make sure we get that in the paper, and my buddy will get that out on social media. So
that'd be great.
Hopefully we'll film it.
Yeah, I'll send emails out in advance of the events, and they'll be on our Facebook page also. Because the more people, the merrier. Any questions on Cause of the Mondays? Otherwise, we'll move on. Given that we have a continuation of our lake management planning project, it could be argued that we could do a larger fundraising event this year or early next year or during the year next year. I don't know what to say about that. In my view, there's a possibility we could tie such an event to a membership function. It's all to be determined. But the long and the short of it is the 2020 Lake Management Plan will require a $12,500 local share contribution. Some of that will come from donated labor, but like this year, roughly $6,500 was cash contributions towards the project, $4,500 from towns supporting it, and $1,800 from our treasury paying the water sampling costs. So setting up a broader fundraiser can help us earn more money and help with outreach, and also a bolstered treasury helps benefit the project by helping prevent us from putting excess reliance on those supporting our 2019 project, because the towns have been quite generous this year Will they support us to the degree they are next year, that they are this year? We won't know until we make the ask later this year. So, any thoughts on a larger event? We could try and do something like we did back when with the Trap Shoot fundraiser and work with Berlin Conservation Club, or try something differently entirely. Whatever it is, if it was a larger event, it would take a larger commitment than just doing a brat fry or a cause of the Mondays. And this is a topic we could table to July also. Thoughts?
I think we'd table it. We'll think about it in the meantime and come up with ideas if it
Table? Seeing nodding heads. It works.
Although I do like that Berlin Conservation Club.
We can talk about it the next one.
Sure.
So we'll table it. Move on to public input and other. Now public input, please. Any comments from the audience before we move on to a few last odds and ends before we adjourn? Getting nothing right now. Okay. We'll move on to other items. There's just a handful of other ones. First, I don't know if anyone saw the Ripon Commonwealth last week, but they met with me to talk about our lake planning grant that we received and what's going on at the lake. So I drove around with Hannah Tetzloff from the Ripon Commonwealth, and she recorded me for almost 2 hours, and I never saw the article before she ran it, so I was surprised to see my mug on the front page, but wasn't too embarrassed after I got done reading it. So if anybody wants to take a glance at that, I've just got that up here on the table.
Do you have it on your website?
No, because they don't put it on their website. So if I put it on our website, I feel like
they want to sell papers.
Yeah, they want to sell papers. They have an excerpt on their website, so I'm not gonna.
Yeah, but if you put it on our website, then other people's.
It's their paper. It's their paper.
People, you can do that, but they did us a favor by doing that, so we try to sell their paper.
Yep.
Might be a copyright thing too. Not sure of that.
Yep. Okay, so that's the newspaper. Want to schedule the next general meeting, and then I've got two others after that real quick. The town hall calendar was free in the month of July. If we did the third Thursday of the month like we have been, that would be Thursday, July 18th at 7 p.m. here, which would be, we'd be talking about the Lake Management Plan update, steering committee update, and progress of the project would be the primary topic. And the other subjects that we like to talk about, treasurer's report, water levels, and whatnot, would be all secondary to Lake Management Plan. Anybody have any concerns with that date or a recommended other date? Otherwise, I'll touch base with Kyle Brown from Nepieskin to reserve the town hall for that time.
17th, is that?
18th. Thursday, July 18th, 7 p.m. Okay. So another topic, I want to introduce it, then I want Doug to talk about it briefly, and then this might be something that we table to the summer meeting. So Doug took Ron and I down to the Waukau Dam in the last week to see the washout situation and how the carp would have came up into the lake. Two potential action items came out of that. One, County Parks Department has repairs to make to their dam, and when we were looking at it and seeing how it works, we wondered if there was an opportunity for them to widen the bypass, if that to a wider degree, which would help prevent washing out of the area between the carp pond and the bypass and the area outside the bypass. If the bypass didn't wash out like it did this year, it would serve as a protective, it would retain its protective qualities that keep carp from getting up to Rush Lake. So action item number one is I'm connecting with Melissa to see what opportunity there is for a grant to support an improvement in the dam to allow it to flow better in a way that helps ensure carp don't make it through if we have a flood like we do, which Doug's view was happen once or twice every 10 years. But the second item was Doug spoke about an enhancement that could be done at the Rush Lake dam. So Doug, if you'd take a minute just to speak about your idea on there, I want you to tee it up, and then I want to gauge what interest we have in pursuing it and how we would go about pursuing it and what kind of time frame we would look to pursue it on.
As far as the dam down at Waukau, I think you first have to start, that's a county park, I believe now. And I don't know if was it Bob Way?
Rob.
Yeah,
Rob Way.
Rob Way is the director.
Yeah, and I think probably we should, a couple of us maybe talk with him and get him down there to take a look at that, to see if they would do something different on that without us looking for funds to do it. That would be number one. Number two is up on the dam at Rush Lake itself. On two of the bays, Bruce and I and a bunch of 2 or 3 guys, and I think that was in 2008, we put 4x4, 3/16" thick steel plates. And it's kind of hard to explain, but each bay where the water comes over, the carp would come up alongside that because there's 2 I-beams in there, and they could sneak up out of the water like that, and then they would jump and then make it into the lake. I sat there for hours watching them do it. Once that plate is in there, they couldn't get in there to make that jump. So that is something that we could do. 2008, I think that got a 4x8 sheet, 3/16" thick, and I think it was around $220. I'll check and see what it would cost now. And how many bays do we have there? 6?
6 bays.
6 bays.
Two are done.
And 2 are done, so there'd be 4 there. I'll put a cost factor on it, and it can be done with straw bags.
No, there's no such thing.
Younger people do. Younger people.
The guy next to you there. No, it went in there relatively easy. It was just the weight of the 4x4 sheets.
And do it when you have relatively low water.
Low water.
Yeah,
Low
so
water.
you're not fighting all
Low
the
water.
current coming through.
I could arrange for getting the steel and getting it down there and that. We need help getting the position of water and then bolting them on the sides of those I-beams. So, what's that?
With that too much water, I was thinking, cause them to wash out over there.
There's a lot of factors in there.
You know, when you guys built that dam and I went on, I looked like the Colorado River.
Okay, so Doug identified, I think, a very straightforward improvement that we could make to the Rush Lake Dam to help minimize the likelihood of carp getting into the lake. A few sheets of 3/16" steel cut and bolted to the dam. The cost that Doug was thinking was a few $100s per sheet, and if we could get donated labor, it could be a project that sounds like could be done for under $1,000. Is that something that we want to resolve to pursue tonight, or do we table it further to a July meeting where we can explore it further? And Doug, I'm not sure if we did talk about it before, but I'm not sure how much you said here, but it's a project where it's better to be completed at the dam when the water levels are lower because the water's coming through the dam and you got to work on the dam. So if we addressed it in July, it seems like we would have plenty of summer left to get it taken care of. So tabling the topic to July, I think, could work if we wanted to be.
I think we should table it because I can get some figures on that steel too, so we know what we're talking about.
How does that get attached to the dam?
You just there's these 2 big I-beams, and you just take the flat 4x8 sheet of steel, put it up against the I-beams, and drill holes in there. It doesn't take a lot of holes because there's no pressure on it. It's in the flow. You're not feeding the flow at all. It's just make an area where the carp can't sneak up there behind that I-beam and then pop up.
It's taking the eddy out.
What's that?
There's an eddy. It creates an eddy where the carp.
Correct. Yeah, basically an eddy in there. Yeah.
So it's just the sheets themselves. You don't have to do any fabricating.
No fabricating.
Attaching.
Yeah.
Well, then we could easily do
I would
that.
like someone to contact Basler Limited who designed that dam and just double check and make sure that you're not doing anything that's going to jeopardize that structure.
That'd be fine. We could do that. We didn't do
You can
that.
laugh at me and say that's never going to happen.
Yeah.
But then if it does, I'm going to be the
That's
one
not a
that
bad
said,
idea to
what are you doing here?
No, we can do that. We didn't do that the last time around, which is fine. I don't have any problem with that.
Right, but now if you're gonna do all of them,
Right.
is there something that you might be doing that we're not even thinking about? So I
Sure.
want those engineers that designed that
Sure.
to look at that, and you can call Brian Glenzinski and he can get the engineers to look at it.
Okay, sounds good.
And then if it's a good thing, you can sell your idea
Yes.
to the engineers.
We'll see.
Okay. They missed something on that. We did.
So we'll table it for the July meeting. We'll have plenty of interaction with Brian Glenzinski on the steering committee to touch base there. Doug's going to run down some figures on that, and we'll readdress it in July meeting. I have one last other item if we're through on the dam part there. Okay, so one, I provided each of you a slip just now, and that comes, I'm providing that to you because I'm at capacity and I need to shed non-essential work. Given the coming water sampling season events and grant compliance as such, I will no longer be providing printed copies of meeting materials to all board members. I'm required to provide written notice either in person or by U.S. mail per our bylaws. I'll be providing written notice of our next meeting to you at the conclusion of this meeting, which I just did before speaking now. I will still print and provide board packs to our 2 non-internet using board members, so you won't be left out in the cold without materials. But to those of you who do use email, how you use the board materials I send to you in electronic format, it's up to you to decide whether you bring a laptop to meetings and pull them up yourself, whether you print them yourself. It's up to you to decide how you want to do that. Regardless, come prepared to participate like you would for any other meeting. If you have ideas that you want to see enacted, we can do it. We could do this together. We're at the start of a really neat process and really looking forward to working with everybody to move forward. So with that, that's the conclusion of our remarks on capacity, and this is your written in-person meeting notice for July. With that, I have nothing else further scheduled for this evening other than the line item to adjourn in the meeting agenda. Anything else?
Make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
Motion made and seconded to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstained? None? Thank you very much.